Okay, so continuing with part 2 of this chapter, we have different ways we can classify neurons. So we can structurally classify them based on how many poles or how many extensions they have. So how many dendrites essentially they have. Also, we can look at the axon. So when we structurally classify them, the processes extending from the cell body would include axon and any number of dendrites. So when we look at this, we have 3 categories. We have multipolar, multi means many, so many poles, many extensions. Bipolar, bi means 2, so 2 extensions. Unipolar, uni means 1, so there's only 1 extension. First, let's look at your multipolar. So we see this associated with the brain and the spinal cord. So we see this associated with the central nervous system. If we look at a picture, okay, we'll see that we have multiple extensions from the cell body. So here's your cell body. There's 1 axon, and there's more than 1 dendrite. Okay, so this would be multipolar, because yet again, multipolar, 1 axon, and more than 1, aka several dendrites. Bipolar, bi means 2, so that means you can only have 2 extensions. So we have our 1 axon, but then we only have 1 dendrite. Okay, so 1 axon and 1 dendrite, not very common. So your least numerous kind of neuron that you have, and you see them associated with the retina of the eye for vision, and then also olfactory pathway, which is going to be your sense of smell. So if we look at that image, here we can see our cell body, and we see it's bipolar because we have 1 extension going this way, which ultimately can branch into several dendrites, that's fine. And this way, 1 axon. So bottom line, 1 extension, 2 extensions. Bipolar. Next up, we have unipolar. Okay, so pseudo-unipolar sometimes is used, so falsely appearing. It falsely appears like there's more than 1 pole, but it is indeed unipolar. This is what we see with all of our sensory neurons. So all the ones carrying information towards the brain or towards the spinal cord. We see that there can only be 1 extension, 1 process from that cell body. It can branch, but there's only 1. So if we look at a picture, here's our cell body. Here's just 1 branch coming off the cell body. Then it splits. Okay, so here we can see it splits. Our axon would carry information this way. Our dendrites would carry information this way. Okay, but bottom line, if there's only 1 extension, that's going to be your unipolar. Okay, but it's pseudo because it falsely looks like there's 2, but yet only 1 extension. Again, our bipolar has exactly 2 extensions, and then our multipolar up here has more than 2. This one has multiple extensions coming towards or away from that cell body. So that's structurally how we can classify. Functionally, how we classify, we have afferent, which is sensory, and again, that's going towards the brain or towards the spinal cord. And then we have efferent, so your efferent or your motor, and that's carrying information away from the brain or away from the spinal cord. And we can see that in this picture right here. Okay, so yet again, some type of a receptor, so like you place your finger on a super sharp tack, it's going to hurt. Okay, so pain receptors are going to get notified. It's going to send that information afferently up to the central nervous system, and then information is going to leave efferently, okay, down towards your effector, which is where the change happens. And it's like, hey, move your finger off of that tack, and then that happens. Now, what we haven't discussed yet is this purple guy in between. This purple guy begins, even though the picture doesn't look like it, it begins and ends within the brain or spinal cord. Never ever do any of its fibers leave the brain or the spinal cord. Look at the name, interneuron. I-N-T-E-R means between. So this is the neuron that you commonly find between the afferent one and the efferent one. So if we look at our notes, interneurons are found in the central nervous system. So if we go back to this picture, your interneuron is between the two. Your interneuron also can have another name. I think you'll see this name primarily with the lab book, not so much with your textbook, but your interneuron. So INTER means between. Your interneuron is the same thing as an association neuron. And again, let's see if I have a purple marker. I don't, so I'll just use green. So again, these guys are in this is your CNS. Okay, and then we had our sensory afferent goes towards, and then coming away would be your motor. Efferents. Okay, and as we saw before, you have your receptor, and then over here you have your effector. Other picture, we drew a 2-neuron reflex arc. This one, because there's 1 neuron, 2 neurons, 3 neurons, we would call this a 3-neuron. A 3-neuron reflex arc. So reflex arc, once again, is just what we drew on the board. Your most common type is a 3-neuron reflex arc, where we had our afferent, our sensory, and then our interneuron, only in the CNS, and then our efferents, our outgoing, our motor. This picture right here shows a 3-neuron reflex arc. There's a lot of things I need to explain with this picture. First off, we are looking at the spinal cord. Okay, so spinal cord section. Spinal cord section, I'll expect you guys to be able to look at a picture of spinal cord and tell me what side is anterior, what side is posterior. You can look at the compass rosette and see anterior is this side, posterior is back here. Anterior is going to have this deep, wide groove. I'll define what the name of this is and so on and so forth in the next chapter. But just keep in mind the anterior side has a deep, wide groove, where the posterior side does not. That's how you can tell front and back. Not only that, every single time, and there's 0 exceptions to this, what we're going to see is incoming information. Again, they're using blue. So if you follow this arrow, we're coming in. So this is going to be afferent, aka sensory. It comes in. Notice that it's entering the spinal cord from the back, from the posterior end. So information always comes in through the back of the spinal cord. That's important. You should jot that down. So sensory information comes in through the back. Then here in the middle, in purple, it's kind of tough to see, but this is where we have our interneuron. Remember, it's only in the CNS. That means it's only in the spinal cord. Never ever does its fibers actually leave the spinal cord. So here's our 1 neuron, which is sensory. Here's our 2nd neuron, which is the interneuron. And here's our 3rd for a 3-neuron reflex arc, which is motor. Motor, outgoing, efferent fibers always exit the spinal cord through the front. So in through the back, out through the front, every single time. Remember in the beginning of the lecture, I mentioned that spinal nerves are always mixed nerves. That means they carry both incoming and outgoing information, so they carry both sensory and motor. Right here, this little piece, we can see this is mixed. This is your spinal nerve. It is mixed. It has fibers carrying information in, and then it has fibers carrying information away. Of course, they split when you get close to the spinal cord, so the incoming can come in through the back, and the outgoing can come out through the front, but the rest of the time over here, we can see that it is mixed. So the spinal nerve carries mixed information. So it is known as a mixed nerve. Now you'll also notice this 3-neuron arc. Again, 1 sensory, 2 interneuron, third is your motor neuron, is ipsilateral. So if we go back to the beginning of the semester and we look at words that we learned, such as ipsilateral and contralateral, ipsilateral means same side of the body. So that means when we look at this picture, information is coming in from the left side of the body. So the L right here means left. And then when information exits the spinal cord out through the front, and it's going to the left side of the body. So ipsilateral means same side of the body. It's coming in from the left and out to the left side of the body only. This one is a 3-neuron arc contralateral. Contralateral means opposite side of the body. So here's neuron number 1, sensory, carrying information into the spinal cord. Of course, we have to come in through the back, posterior end. Here's our purple interneuron. That's neuron number 2. And then pink, this is our 3rd neuron. This is our motor neuron. This is outgoing. This is efferent. And we come out through the front, okay, through the anterior side. And then we're traveling to the right side of the body. So contralateral means opposite side of the body. So if I ask you on the exam to draw me a 3-neuron reflex arc through the spinal cord and make it contralateral, this is what you'd have to draw. You'd have to make certain the sensory information comes in through the back of the spinal cord. You have to have that 2nd neuron, the interneuron, and it has to start and end in the spinal cord. And then you have to have the 3rd neuron, which needs to exit through the front. But because it's contralateral, now we go to the right side of the body. We came from the left side of the body, and we're going to the right side of the body. So you should be able to do that with a compass rosette. Okay, so I may ask you to do an ipsilateral one, or I may ask you to do a contralateral one. We don't know. Okay, so we'll find out when we take that test, but you should know how to do both. And then I have one more to show you. This one, let's just look at the name before we look at the crazy picture. Oops. The name, it's contralateral, so we know we're dealing with opposite sides of the body. This one is intersegmental. I-N-T-E-R means between, so between segments. That means information can either travel up the spinal cord or down the spinal cord. So you're going between spinal cord segments. These other 2 pictures, if we go back here, we'll see if this was like the spinal cord associated with like the T12 area, okay? Information comes in around T12 and exits around T12. You're not really moving up or down the spinal cord. Where over here, we're going to move up or down the spinal cord. So here, this is contralateral. So information comes in through the back of the spinal cord, and then we can travel up or we can travel down. Intersegmental, we're moving up or down. So let's say we move up. Here's our 2nd neuron, our interneuron. Here's our 3rd. We're going to exit through the front and go to the right side of the body. So in through the left side, through the back, traveled up. Here's your interneuron. Here's your motor neuron, out through the front to the right side. Or we can travel down. Same thing happens. Sensory comes in from the left side of the body, in through the back of the spinal cord, travels down. Here's our 2nd neuron, our interneuron. Here's our 3rd, which is our motor neuron, out through the front into the right side of the body. So this intersegmental just means you can travel up or down to different regions of the spinal cord. It's contralateral, so we're coming out the opposite side. We can also have ipsilateral ones, and ipsilateral will do exactly this, what the arrow is doing. So if you follow it, in from the left, in through the back, you'd have an interneuron right here, and then you'd come out through the front this way. That'd be ipsilateral. Okay, but if it was intersegmental, we would actually travel down or up and then out the same direction. Two neuron arc, that was the one we started off class with. That's pretty simple. Okay, so there's no interneurons with a two neuron arc. The synapse, remember a synapse is going to be at that junction, at that synaptic cleft, where information travels from one neuron to another or from one neuron to an effector. So if this is the initial neuron, so information comes this way, it needs to leave this guy and go to this one. This is your synaptic cleft, and your synapse is going to be what happens. You can have electrical synapses, not very common types of synapses. Chemical are the most common and typical types of synapses. Chemical synapses involve neurotransmitters. The chemicals that get released are called neurotransmitters because they are transmitted from one neuron to another, from one neuron to an effector, and they are chemicals, okay, that get transmitted, so neurotransmitters. If you look at this picture is straight out of the book. This is advanced A&P content. It is just showing the synapse up close. It's pretty crazy. There's a lot going on. We can see calcium ions play a role, sodium ions play a role. But here we can see these vesicles are filled with neurotransmitters. They receive signals to get released, and they're going to bind to receptors out here. This is a G-coupled type of a receptor. There's a few different types of receptors you can have, but this is your synaptic cleft in between the two. So neurotransmitters get released and get taken up by the postsynaptic cell, the one after the synapse. This is the presynaptic cell, the one before. Okay, so just remember, neurotransmitters are those chemicals that get released. This little segment right here, if you still recall the muscle system where we talked about the different layers, we had the sarcolemma, we had looking at the endomysium, the perimysium, and the epimysium. This is the same general concept, except we're dealing with nerves. We're dealing with the nervous system. So instead of endomysium, we have endoneurium. Okay, so if we go in order, it's the same order. You have endoneurium, and that's going to surround each nerve fiber. So the endoneurium surrounds every nerve fiber. So we'll look at that. If we look at this picture. Okay, so here we're looking at a nerve fiber surrounded with endoneurium. Okay, so endoneurium surrounds those nerve fibers. So if we, let me zoom in a little more so it's easier to see. Okay. So this blue is a nerve fiber, this blue is a nerve fiber, this is a nerve fiber. So each one of these axons are nerve fibers. Okay, so we have our nerve fibers. You may or may not have myelination. Schwann cells can do the myelination, as can oligodendrocytes, so you have your myelination. Now, the barrier that surrounds that, and each and every one of these, right here in pink, this is your endoneurium. So it surrounds each and every one of these nerve fibers. Okay, so lots of individual endoneurium. If you have 20 of these nerve fibers, you have 20 pieces of endoneurium. Now, a bundle of these nerve fibers together, so how they're collected together, is called a fascicle. Same thing that we saw in the muscular system. You have fascicles, and fascicles are wrapped up with something called perineurium. So here's the perineurium, this gray color right here, and that surrounds this fascicle or this bundle of nerve fibers. And we can see that if we go back here. Okay, so the perineurium, that's going to hold together a fascicle, which is a bundle of fibers. And again, each fiber right here is covered with endoneurium. Now, we can hold together all these fascicles. You can have one fascicle bound to another, bound to another, bound to another, have some blood vessels in there, and that is what is called a nerve. That's wrapped up with epineurium. So this unit is one fascicle, this unit is a fascicle, here's a fascicle, here's one. So this picture has roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 8 fascicles, I would say. And then we can see that all 8 of these are wrapped up with this outermost covering, which is called your epineurium. So epineurium surrounds the nerve as a whole. So again, each of these nerve fibers, axons, they could have myelin, they could not, but bottom line, each and every single one of these little blue straws is wrapped up with your endoneurium. Put them all together, you have yourself a fascicle. That's wrapped up with perineurium. So there's perineurium around this entire group, there's perineurium around this entire group, and so on. And then you put all of these fascicles together, so all 8 of these bundles together, and wrap it up. You have yourself a full nerve, which is covered with the epineurium. So that's our layout for these general nerves. Now, one little tidbit of terminology we have is when we went back to that first slide today, actually I'll do that right now. Go back to this first slide today. We can see that all of these yellow nerves are part of the PNS, right? So the peripheral nervous system contains all those nerves. So now, if we look at this picture, or this slide, nerves are found in the PNS. You guys know that already. We know that, okay? So nerves are in the PNS. So what do you call these fibers when they enter the brain or the spinal cord? Okay, we saw cranial nerves can go to and from the brain. Spinal nerves go to and from the spinal cord. But what are those fibers physically called when they access the brain or spinal cord? You can no longer call them nerves. Now you need to call them tracts. It could be the same physical fiber, but the moment it is part of the brain or spinal cord, you have to call it a tract. So your olfactory nerve, okay, that's your first cranial nerve. Okay, that's outside the brain. But as soon as those fibers enter the brain to carry information for your sense of smell, the olfactory nerve becomes the olfactory tract. So the tract is within the brain or spinal cord. The nerve is outside the brain or spinal cord. Very important terminology we just need to get down. Okay, so tracts are in the CNS, nerves are in the peripheral. A little bit more definitions. We know that white matter is myelinated. So white means myelinated. Gray matter is unmyelinated. Okay, we talked about that already. Now, if it's myelinated in the peripheral nervous system, it's referred to as a nerve. If it's myelinated in the central nervous system, it's referred to as a tract. Okay, it's just some terminology. Now, gray matter, terminology can change. Okay, and I haven't brought this up until this point, just because it can be a little bit confusing when looking at some of those other pictures, which is why, like on this picture, okay, they refer to this as a tract or a nerve because it is myelinated. Okay, it is myelinated, so it could be a tract or a nerve. But what if it wasn't myelinated? Remember I mentioned you could have myelination or not. If you don't have myelination and it's in the central nervous system, now you call it nuclei. You do not call it a tract. If it's unmyelinated, it is nuclei. If it's myelinated in the central nervous system, you call it a tract. What about the peripheral? If it's unmyelinated, you call it ganglia. If it's myelinated, you call it a nerve. Okay, so terminology is a little weird, a little trippy in this chapter. A little bit of practice, maybe some flashcards, you can get it down. And then once again, looking at mixed nerves contain both sensory and motor neurons. Okay, so they have both. And again, sensory, that carries information up towards the central nervous system, where motor carries information away from the central nervous system. And that concludes chapter number 18.